Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Jake for the State podcast. I'm coming to you live tonight. I didn't really make a big announcement about this because I'm working with schedules, and this is the lead in into the legislative session. So these schedules sometimes are unpredictable. They're nice and crazy, getting all of the representatives and senators getting the bills filed and ready, and all the meetings leading into the legislative session. So I didn't want to announce it ahead of time too much in case something popped up, but we were able to work it in. Got Representative Gabe Woolley representing House District 98 from out in Broken Arrow. He's going to join me to talk about a number of things that he's working on that are on his radar. I know it's on your radar as well. Anything from Sharia law to data centers, abolition of abortion, homeschooling, education in general. We'll dig into all of that. So you guys stay tuned. Going to get right to it. Let me see if I can make my intro work. Let's go.
This is the Jake for the State podcast, and this is the call for every red-blooded, God-fearing, liberty-loving patriot to prepare yourself, take your position, stand your ground, and advance the cause of freedom. Let's go.
All right, let's go. Let's go. Right over here to Mr. Gabe Woolley. Gabe, welcome, Representative. Well, hang on. I got you muted. All right, there we go.
Thank you for having me, Jake.
You bet, man. Thank you. I know you had a busy day full of meetings, but appreciate your time tonight. And again, just appreciate what you're doing up there at the state capitol. Wanted to see what all you were working on. I've, of course, been tracking the conservatives that I name you among them in the recent People's Audit that Jason Murphy put out. You were in there, I think, in the top 10 of the most conservative legislators in the House. And so glad to have you in there. Thank you for fighting for what you're fighting for. I mentioned that you represent House District 98 out in Broken Arrow. So if anybody's in the know here in Oklahoma, Broken Arrow, they think of the mosque. The recent city council meeting dealing with the mosque. And this has been on your radar. Of course, you were out there, and you have since then issued a bill dealing with a ban on Sharia law. So first, I guess if we could back up and give me your take on what is the environment like there in Broken Arrow where you live? I mean, this is your hometown, your constituents. Tell me what the climate is post city council meeting dealing with the mosque.
Yeah, when we check the temperature on this issue with Sharia law and Islam and the development of the Islamic mosque on social media or in person, there were over 1,000, almost 2,000 people that showed up to the city council meeting speaking out against the mosque, to the point where it kind of got repetitive, and they eventually, the city council had figured they had heard all they needed to hear and were ready to vote this measure down, which they did successfully vote this measure down for violations of land usage and the land not being properly sustainable for this type of development, given the structure and the design that Broken Arrow has already committed to and put forward. So that was voted down. We do anticipate that it's very likely that the opposition will sue. In fact, I think they're already pursuing a lawsuit, and it's very likely I think they'll probably sell the land, buy land in Owasso or somewhere else and try again. We know that Islam and Sharia law are not going anywhere quietly, or at least without putting up a major fight. So Americans and Oklahomans, because this is Sharia law is a political ideology rather than a religion, or Islam rather, we need to be on guard for this because it violates our constitutional freedoms, our American way of life. So we do anticipate that mosque development coming back for another push, and we'll have to be ready for that. But we had a great number of constituents turn out, speak out against the mosque. And then on the other side of that, running House Joint Resolution 1040 to ban Sharia law, or as the terms are in the legislation, any religious or foreign law, from taking place and having an authority or any insight into the courtrooms in Oklahoma. This House Joint Resolution would pass the House, the Senate, then go to a vote of the people. 10 years ago, 70% of Oklahomans voted to pass this same measure. So we're going to try again 16 years now later to protect our constitutional freedoms here in Oklahoma by banning Sharia law effectively by this legislation.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask is, how do you anticipate this going differently than it did back in, I think it was 2010, wasn't it?
It was.
what 15 years ago, 15, 16 years ago. And, my concern is the Supreme Court. Will they once again prove themselves to be the liberal court that they are and shut this down, when I would say the majority of Oklahomans would love to see an outright ban on Sharia law? So, any concerns there?
Yeah, we are falling behind on this. I would like Oklahoma to be leading the charge, but as we have seen recently, that Texas and Florida have already taken action against CARE and other groups, categorizing certain groups as threatening to America and to the state. And so there's been action taken on that. Just saw a development today that the state of Arizona is moving and has already moved in the first step of passing a ban on Sharia law. So Oklahoma is kind of following here where we should be leading. Our legislative session starts next week, so I really hope this legislation would pass quickly and would go to a vote of the people. The difference is we have a new administration, and I don't believe in giving up on doing the right thing just because it wasn't successful 16 years ago. So we have duplicated the 2010 measure, are running it again, and we'll make amendments as necessary. But it was struck down by the 10th Circuit Court that decided with a lower court's decision under the guise, which I would say is a Trojan horse, of stating that this is violation of religious freedom. But again, the narrative needs to change to what's actually accurate and true, that Islam is not a religion, but a political ideology hiding under the Trojan horse of a religion, which does seek to infiltrate free and independent nations and use their own laws against them, which we've seen Dearborn, Michigan, we've seen Texas, we've seen, in fact, we've got a number of states that have growing, developing mosques and have Sharia law courts or Sharia law court type influences in them. Here in the United States, I've been working on a timeline of Sharia law and Islam's influence from Iran all the way to the founding of this nation back in 1776, but in 1786, finding letters from John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, having direct encounters with Muslim groups, writing letters saying this does not comply with the Constitution we just passed 10 years ago.
Wow.
And so we're building a full timeline of everything that took place in America involving Sharia law and Islam up to 2026. And then we're studying Iran, studying Egypt and other countries, places that used to be Christian nations before Islam took over. And we have to learn from that data and learn from the mistakes of others rather than falling into it ourselves here in Oklahoma or paying the price of ignorance.
What is the name of that House Joint Resolution again? What's the number?
House Joint Resolution 1040.
1040. Okay.
For the year 2026.
Yeah, so keep your eye on that, guys. House Joint Resolution 1040, and this would be an outright ban on Sharia law or the influence of any foreign court in our courts here in Oklahoma, correct?
Religious or foreign influence in our courtrooms would not be recognized. Judges, I intentionally filed a House Joint Resolution because that would amend the Oklahoma Constitution, and judges are to interpret the Constitution. If it's just a law on paper and it does not amend the Constitution, there's more ways around it. So I intentionally filed a House Joint Resolution because that puts it to a vote of the people and it puts it into our Oklahoma Constitution.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So I'll be tracking that. Even if it passes and goes to a vote, we'll see what the Supreme Court does. So you of course have been outspoken about DHS reform, as have I. It's been something that we've actually worked together on in many areas. Of course, your family has gone through so much fighting for your nephew, and the case has become well known in Oklahoma. And first of all, any updates on the case?
No, we're kind of waiting on some third-party reviews on things and continuing to talk to lawyers and attorneys and pursuing different avenues. But unfortunately, the legal system is very slow. It's generally, versus what's on paper in our Constitution, what's actually acted out in the courtroom is not generally in favor of the people. Unfortunately, under many circumstances, not every time, but too many times. So it's an uphill battle. We have made some progress here and there, but ultimately we're still fighting for Clayton to come home and be restored to his family, to be removed from the home in which his own two stepbrothers have been removed from, but he still remains there, which is baffling to me.
Wow.
So we're still working on that, but I am running some legislation to try and reform the judicial system and the Department of Human Services.
Now, one of the bills that I was part of the interim study on, was it an official interim study? I'm not sure.
There was an official interim study on House Bill 1100 and 1164. Those have new numbers this year, so I'll have to get those to you. But it's the same bill. I just removed the criminal charge aspect on it, and we're going to try to chip away and do things piece by piece. But it does change the preponderance of evidence, which is a 51% possibility that a child may or may not have been abused or neglected, no proof, it changes that to clear and convincing evidence, putting the burden of proof on the court and DHS to actually have to prove that something was done. So it's an innocent until proven guilty piece of legislation.
100%. And this, I consider my own children, and the threat of the government coming in to take my children without cause, an unjustified removal, that will make a person be a criminal. So it would make you lose your mind. I actually was late on our call because I was on the call with a lady that was pouring her heart out, describing what she's going through. And these stories are rampant throughout the state of Oklahoma. All of these families whose families have been torn apart because of, I mean, I don't know how you do it, say it any other way. It comes down to judicial corruption and corruption within DHS. And this has to be dealt with. It's high on my agenda. I know it is on yours. I love this bill to move from a preponderance of evidence to clear and convincing proof. How good do you feel about this as far as it being heard?
Well, I know it's no secret. I know that they tried to run the same legislation out of Texas. So this is a problem nationwide. We've seen it in other states too. I went up to West Virginia and they asked me to come speak to them there before I ever took place in the legislature on their issues that they were having there. I spoke to one of their committees. So this is a growing issue, and it really is to the point where I think we need to do a class action lawsuit or get the feds involved while we have the Trump administration in place and try to get their attention on it. But it's something that is definitely a hot topic here in Oklahoma. We had Dr. Deborah Shropshire removed and someone replacing her for the head of DHS by the governor, knowing there needed to be some changes there. We're wondering if this new change is going to work or if it's going to be just as difficult. It's really difficult. I'm almost to the point where I think heads of agencies need to be elected because of how much authority they have and how big of the operation they're running. I know that we get into some other issues with that. I would like to explore that issue. That's not anything to do with legislation at this point, just a thought. But I know that there is a lot of bureaucracy and people that aren't elected put in a position of authority. So pay very close attention. Who we elect for governor, who's going to appoint those people is very important. Who we elect as our sheriffs and district attorneys that take you to the courtroom on these false charges or accusations is very important too. It hits very close to home. We need to pay very close attention to local politics. County commissioners that would be voting on any type of lawsuit settlements. Wagner County, my county, has $13.5 million in debt to pay off a lawsuit caused by the sheriff's department for a wrongful death, and a second one coming down the pike for another wrongful death. Someone falsely accused of being intoxicated and was killed when he was arrested, and autopsy showed that there was no anything in his system, no drugs, no alcohol, and so now the county will be paying for that. So the taxes in Wagner County are significant. Right. So we have to pay attention to who we're putting in office and who's appointing these people locally, all the way up to the state and federal level.
That's a good word. Absolutely. Yeah, those property taxes are going to see a little bump over there in Wagner County, I imagine. So it's unfortunate that the mistakes of elected officials do fall on the people. But again, like you said, that's why it's so important we show up and vote and elect the right people. I do have a little bit of an inside scoop. I know a guy running for governor that's probably going to give a lot of attention to DHS. Just saying, we're going to get the right head in there that's from outside the system, that's as interested in reform as we are, that we need to have the right head of DHS, and that is coming. All right. Next up, Gabe, you also are carrying a bill that is very important to me as well. It deals with the abolition of abortion.
Yeah.
And I mean, now I'll say this. I was at a meeting over in Tulsa the other day, and this was the final question asked of the pro tem of the Senate and the pro tem of the House. They were both there, and they were fielding questions. The last question asked was, hey, I heard that there was a bill to abolish abortion in the state of Oklahoma. I thought we already dealt with that. And, I have grace for people that may not know. But what surprised me was the response of leadership from both the House and the Senate, who both agreed, yeah, I don't think that a bill like this is necessary. We've dealt with abortion in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
What's your response?
I mean, unfortunately, that's not the case. I know that that's a narrative out there. You get these narratives out there that are repeated so much, people start to think that they're true. So I'm not going to say that anyone is willingly ignoring something or like that. I'm not going to make that claim. There very well could be that narrative that people believe. There's also this narrative out there that has ran so long that people believe that the separation of church and state is in the Constitution. We had a representative Democrat say that on the House floor, and it's not. So when something exists long enough and people don't set the record straight and set the narrative straight, aligning with truth, you get these situations where we think something's been dealt with and it really hasn't been dealt with completely. And the fact is we do still have issues with abortion and with abortion pills being trafficked into Oklahoma, or being allowed here rather, trying to stop the trafficking of that. We do have abortions that take place. There are ways around that, excuses for that. The bill I'm running would abolish and criminalize abortion. There is some language in there that would allow for specifics when not allow for abortion, but would allow for there to be actions taken to make sure you're pursuing the safety of the life of the baby and the mother, and because both lives are equally as important. And so it's a conversation that needs to be had. It's something we need to keep pushing for. We're running it out of the House because it had some final action in the Senate, so we need to fire it out of the other chamber and then hope that leadership will allow something like this to come through, because they'll have to make an exception in the Senate for it to come through. But same thing with the Sharia law issue. We tried that 16 years ago and it got shut down by the court. Just because something didn't work before doesn't mean you don't keep pushing to do the right thing. So we are running the abolition bill again and the Sharia law bill again, because I was elected to stand up and do what's right and ask what my constituents have asked for. And government is here to protect the constitutional rights of the people, not to give them their rights. So we are here to protect the rights of people, of human beings, from the moment of conception all the way up to natural death. And this bill is just a matter of a fact, calling it like it is, very scientific bill that murder is murder. And we'd like to say that murder is outlawed in Oklahoma, but it's not completely outlawed until abortion is completely outlawed. So it's just being consistent with life and what murder is, calling it like it is, raising a standard. If this law is put in place, a society will have to adapt and adjust to that standard that's been set. And the behavior of people over time will change when the new law and the regulation and expectation is set.
Do you have any co-signers so far on that bill?
I do have some. I believe Senator Dusty Devers is on that bill, and Senator Warren Hamilton is the primary Senate author. And we do have, I believe, another representative near the Catoosa, Claremore area signing on. I need to check again because that happens frequently. And so we do have several co-signers on it. Yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, that must happen. And of course, being believers, Christians, we believe in the sovereignty of God, the blessings of God. And, how can we expect the blessings of God if we allow the murder of the innocent? And so it has to be dealt with. It has to be finalized here in Oklahoma. I'm thankful that we don't have any surgical clinics doing surgical abortions, medical abortions in the state of Oklahoma. Praise God for that. But we must completely end this practice. And dealing with the mail-in abortions becomes a little tricky. But how does this bill seek to deal with that when you're dealing with the mail-in abortifacients?
Well, it would criminalize the act of abortion on every level. So it's basically, like I said, calling it like it is. Murder is murder, and so we need to hold the same standard across the board. So it's not this bill that makes a million exceptions and really finds all these loopholes for it. There is language there to protect and seek to protect the life of the mother and the baby. But other than that, it's a criminalized abortion act and just calling it like it is. So there aren't loopholes to get around in this. We worked with a good number of abolitionist groups and even pro-life legislators, and consulted with them and talked to them about this issue and strategized on it the best that we can. And we believe it's time to continue pushing for the abolition of abortion.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, data centers is something that is on everybody's mind, a lot of people's mind anyway. And I know over in Broken Arrow in your district, people are talking about it quite a bit. Do you have a bill to address this? I know you've addressed it in different forums and different areas, but do you have a bill to deal with this? And what are you hearing from the people in your district about it?
I have not filed a bill on data centers. There are some senators and reps working on it, and I will be supporting that legislation, making sure there's regulation around it, and then hearing from the response from the people that don't want these data centers, figuring out what we need to do to make sure that we put power back into the hands of the people. They just don't want to see Oklahoma sold out to these big industries that are going to consume a lot of things that are not generally in favor of the people, more supporting big corporations and things like this that are not. I would argue in many ways, especially if it has some type of foreign influence. I'm not making the claim here and now that the data centers do. We need to look into this. We know that we've had other groups come into Oklahoma or pursue Oklahoma that have foreign influence. So we have to keep these America First principles going, be consistent with that argument when we talk about these big groups and big operations coming in that could have ties to other nations or too much federal involvement and threatening our state sovereignty.
Absolutely. No, it's good. And I expect there's going to be a slate of bills that deal with this from different aspects. And I know that I'm talking about it myself as I go around the state. So I expect some solid reform, hopefully. I mean, we expected some good reform dealing with green energy last year and got very little, if any. So we'll see what we come out with concerning green energy and data centers this year. But one of the things on everybody's mind, I say, is probably the number one question I get asked around the state deals with education. And you are a former educator in public school. Was it public or private? I think you were in a private school, right?
I worked in public charter, and then for a short time in private.
Okay. Okay. So as an educator, I mean, obviously education's on your radar, but you actually have one to address homeschooling in the state of Oklahoma, which I appreciate as a homeschool dad, something that we want to fight to preserve and stay the freest state in the union when it comes to homeschooling. So what are you working on in that realm?
Yeah, we did find some loopholes and some ability for some universities to be just a little, what I would call, discriminatory against homeschoolers, or extra hurdles put in place that are not the same expectations for public school students or private school students. So there is the ability, I don't know if a university is doing this, where the university could require a different admissions test or additional admissions test to get a homeschooler in. This language of the bill would require that they have the same admissions for homeschoolers as private school or public school students. And then we have the problem with the Oklahoma's Promise for getting a scholarship to get into Oklahoma. Homeschoolers only have until age 16 to apply. Public schoolers until 18. So that's discriminatory. So it should be raised, and it should be 18 years of age for the deadline for everybody, every student, no matter where you come from. As long as you've had your education, parents are going to vouch for that. And parents are the experts when it comes to their children. And so we need to have this in place. If they're worried that there's not enough documentation of this or that, it should be the same documentation required for public schoolers. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if a homeschool student or someone coming from a different type of education is not meeting the expectation, they would be put on academic probation just like any other student. They need to pay their tuition, show up to class, keep their GPA up. It's the same expectation for everyone, but they should be admitted with the same expectation as everybody else.
Yes, 100%. Level ground going into a university. Can they pass the test? Can they same qualifications for everyone? I think that makes sense. When you look at public schools right now, Gabe, lots of talk, of course, on reform. How do we bring up our scores? How do we actually teach kids how to read? How do we deal with the trauma coming into our classrooms? I mean, the discussion is all over the place. Are you a part of any of these within the House? And where do you see the high points, the low-hanging fruit? Where can we help education the fastest, the quickest here in Oklahoma?
It is something I'm looking at as a former educator and as a conservative and as a parents' rights activist. We don't need to reinvent the wheel on everything. If Mississippi is pulling some good data with good practices, there are things we could take from them that are working that align with Oklahoma principles. So I had reached out to the Speaker of the House and say, why don't we look into what Mississippi is doing? Another representative, Rob Hall, he's a great guy, has been working on that area too. So it's not a piece of legislation I'm running, but it's one I'll be supporting as long as it's shaped correctly and protects the parental rights and authority when it comes to their child's education. But I did pursue that, at least prompting, to make sure we look into what Mississippi is doing that works, that doesn't work, because their numbers and data are showing that they skyrocketed in their performance. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel on everything. We can learn from that and then incorporate those Oklahoma values and protections in place to protect parents' rights when it comes to education. And so it's an ongoing process. I'll be supporting good legislation on that issue. A lot of things you do as a legislator, you might run your own bill. You might put a lot of your effort into supporting other good legislation or attempting to shoot down bad legislation. It's not always about the bill and your name being on the bill. There's 101 of us. We all represent different districts. We need to collaborate, work together, push back, debate, talk. And that's what I'm doing to represent my district in every area on every piece of legislation. Showing up to vote, doing my best not to miss a vote, speaking out, debating, questioning when it comes to other bills. So when it comes to this education type reform, I will be supporting good legislation on that issue.
And that's all we can ask for. Support the good legislation. And like you said, sometimes it's about targeting and shooting down the bad legislation and standing in the way of that.
Yeah.
And, it takes both. You got to work it from both angles. So we need good guys in there willing to do that.
I'll give one example real quick under the education umbrella. We had two, actually. We had AmeriCorps, which is a very far left-leaning Bill and Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama-backed supported group that found its way into Oklahoma, and there was a bill to give some state funding to them. Rob Hall and I were able to speak up against this bill on the floor and get it shot down to not have that liberal ideology festering in Oklahoma further through AmeriCorps, the National Service Program. And then there was another bill that was in the form of a scholarship paid for by tax dollars for the descendants of the Tulsa Race Massacre. It was reparations. So not people that suffered through the race massacre themselves, but just ancestry down and down forever. The current day taxpayer has to pay for the sins of terrible crimes committed in 1921. None of the victims or the those that committed those crimes exist today. Why is the current day taxpayer paying for this? If you want to start a GoFundMe and start a fund and donate towards this, but reparations is not something conservatives or Oklahomans have asked for. That's not something that's the current day responsibility of the taxpayer. And so we had to shoot that bill down, and I put an amendment on that bill, making it a GPA requirement, essay requirement, and every Oklahoma student, because that's part of Oklahoma's history, the Tulsa Race Massacre, could apply for that and could pursue that rather than it being discriminatory, essentially, for only descendants of Tulsa Race Massacres or gauging it just towards a certain race of people and dividing us by our race, which is not something that's biblical or constitutional.
Absolutely. Yeah, great example there. I mean, the organizations that are connected to our education system are very concerning. The NGOs, those that contract with our local school districts, and you named one, AmeriCorps. But then also more broadly are the teachers' unions, and their influence here in the state. Is that something that you experienced as a former educator, the influence of the unions, and how significant is that? What should we be doing to push back against that?
When I was at Tulsa Public Schools, the unions tried to get me to join. I wasn't interested in joining a union. I did a different program that just allowed me to have insurance if I needed an attorney. It wasn't a union. And so it was a more conservative outlet. Just did that for 1 year, but I'm not on board with the unions. I actually wrote a bill last year. We didn't run it because I had too many bills that would have made it more difficult for the unions to have a foothold in Oklahoma, the teachers union specifically, to try to push back on that. But we were not able to run that legislation, but it's certainly something that's on my radar. They don't really hold those principles that conservative Oklahomans hold, that America First principled individuals hold. It's a very Marxist group and ideology, much like Islam, and much like Black Lives Matter, and much like the 1619 Project and the LGBTQ agenda that they're pushing in front of your children without your consent or knowledge in many cases. And so we have our eye on the issues with the teachers' unions. That's something we will continue to pursue to hold accountable, really get them out of Oklahoma is the objective, because they don't align. Something else needs to be offered that is not putting pressure on teachers to join something and then making their life more difficult if they don't do so. And it does not hold the values that Oklahoma parents want their children exposed to. So the teachers' unions is a huge issue that we need to continue to push back against.
It's well said. Last question. I thought about it as you were just answering that. You had mentioned the heads of the agencies possibly need those to be elected officials rather than appointed. And there is a discussion, I think maybe even a bill presented dealing with the state superintendent to move him to an appointed position. Is that correct? He's currently an elected position, so move to an appointed position. What do you think?
Governor Stitt had made the comment last year about possibly doing this. And it sounds like someone might be running the bill to do that. I personally, my take on it is not that we should not be doing that. I do think the superintendent has such an impactful job that it should be elected. We definitely saw an interesting election with this last cycle, and we have seen the superintendent's position become a very controversial seat and become something that is this constant tug and war back and forth with teachers unions and with America First principles and with parental rights and things like this. So it's a position you need to be very careful for, and parents, the voters, should have a say in that role for agencies and the heads of such an impactful, strong department that so many tax dollars flow through. That seat should be elected, in my opinion. If you want to appoint the board members and have one way or the other, but currently the board members at the State Department of Education are appointed. And now if we take the superintendents, there's not very many checks and balances coming in from the people and the will of the people. So if you're going to have the superintendent be appointed, you need to elect the board members at the State Board of Education. If you're going to have it the other way around and we need to elect the superintendent and have the board appointed, or have them all elected.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's exactly my response, is we need the checks and balances. There's a reason that the board is appointed and he's elected, or he or she. And so, yeah, I think we should keep it that way. And, but I do acknowledge your point about the heads of the other agencies, about possibly them being elected and ultimately accountable to the people themselves. So I think that carries some weight for consideration. I know you've had a long day, and I know that you have probably another one coming up tomorrow, but I really appreciate your time, Representative Woolley, and we'll be watching these bills go through and love to check back in with you as the session proceeds. It starts off Monday, is that right?
February 2nd, yeah.
February 2nd. Okay, it's going to kick off. So get some rest. We'll be praying for you, and we'll be watching these bills work their way through the system.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Jake.
You bet. All right, it's Representative Gabe Woolley, and I appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you are. If you're watching this live on Facebook or live on X, you can share it, because I think this is an important conversation, and people need to hear not only what bills we're talking about, but who is putting them forth and who to support, who to get behind. So join the conversation, share the conversation. Be sure to subscribe if you're on YouTube, and I will see you next time. God bless.